welcome to the webinar on this Friday morning, at least on the East Coast of the U.S. This is Sarah Mason from the National Ecosystem Services Partnership here at Duke University. And we're hosting this webinar today because NESP recently joined the Natural Capital Coalition, and we thought that some of their content, tools, and methods would really be of interest to this NESP community. So we've invited this great group of speakers here today to discuss the coalition and some of the applications of its work. We have a lot to get through, so I'll get us started shortly. But first, I just want to remind everyone that we have a question and answer session at the end. So please type your questions into the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll read them off and get a discussion going after the presenters have all given their talks. And so with that, I will hand it off to Marta Santamaria, the Policy Director at the Natural Capital Coalition, to give us a bit of background and context.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Can you hear me well?
Next slide.
No, no, sorry. Well, yeah, it's fine. So thank you very much and welcome, everyone. We are delighted to be here to share the work of the Natural Capital Coalition in trying to explore how to create an enabling environment for natural capital approaches. So I'm giving this presentation also on behalf of my colleague Martin Locke that cannot be today with us. Sorry, we move to the next slide. I will show you the agenda for this webinar. I will introduce briefly what is the Natural Capital Coalition and the Natural Capital Protocol, and then we would like to move into the two main initiatives of our program of the enabling environment. So the first one is the government dialogue and the narrative that was the result of our work in the government dialogue last year, trying to explain why natural capital is relevant and how governments are responding to it. And the second initiative is combining forces initiative to try to explore the synergies between the natural capital approaches used by the public sector and the private sector. And we wanted to give you a very practical view of that, and that's why we invited here Lucrecia from Costa Rica to present a practical application, then in Costa Rica, as well as Leendert-Jan and Sander to present some work done in the Netherlands. So if we move to the next slide, the first would be an introduction of the Natural Capital Coalition and the protocol for those that are not familiar with it. If we move to the next slide, we can see that the Natural Capital Coalition was established by the natural capital community as a collaborative space to harmonize approaches and grow a supportive enabling environment for natural capital thinking. So as you can see, we are a multi-stakeholder initiative integrated by different stakeholder groups, including conservation organizations, finance community, business sector, policymakers, research and academia, as well as others. So if we move to the next slide, I can introduce you the Natural Capital Protocol. That is the framework that the coalition published in 2016 that is recognized as the standardized framework for business to identify, measure, and value their impacts and dependencies on natural capital. So the framework is a structure to try to respond to 4 basic questions to take decisions. First, understanding why natural capital is important. Second, what are the key aspects, the key material impacts and dependencies. Third one, how to measure and value these impacts and dependencies. And finally, how to take decisions based on the results. So if we move to the next slide, you could see that the Natural Capital Protocol was focused or intending to inform business decision making, but we realized that it was also really important to create an enabling environment to apply the natural capital thinking. And talking with our community, we realized that the governments were really interested in exploring the role of governments in creating this enabling environment. That's why we launched the government dialogue at the end of 2017, and I will go deeper later in the results of this government dialogue. We also launched the Combining Forces initiative because we realized that both the public sector and the private sector were using different approaches, and there are synergies between them and they can benefit each other. So it was interesting to explore these issues through the Combining Forces initiative. And finally, we launched the program of the regional platforms to work to bring the discussion from the global level to a more local context. And we recently launched the regional platform platform in the United States. So I thought it was interesting for you to know, and you can find the way to connect with our US regional platform through our webpage. So we move to the next slide. I will show you so when we started with the government dialogue, the first meeting, there was a discussion about what was needed, and there was agreement of the need of having a common narrative explaining why natural capital is relevant and how governments are responding to this relevance. So if we move to the next slide, I can show you a bit of how was the process. So during the government dialogue, we engaged with more than 30 different countries, and in the development of the narrative, 12 of these governments were involved with the support of 8 organizations. They were developing a draft of the narrative, and we discussed this draft with the rest of the governments in the Natural Capital Week in Paris that took place in November. So if we move to the next slide, I will skip the part of explaining what is natural capital that is described in the narrative because all of you are familiar with it. I will go to show why natural capital is essential for policymakers. So if we move to the next slide, you can see that the key element is that our economies are facing new systemic risks and opportunities that are stretching far beyond the borders of the country. So the Sustainable Development Goals are global ambitions that can be translated to national objectives. And to meet those ambitions, we need to manage properly our capital. So we have to manage the financial and physical capital, the social and human capital, as well as the natural capital. But the key element is that the natural capital is underpinning the rest of the capital, so it's essential, an essential foundation for our economies and societies. So, for example, in low-income countries, the natural capital accounts for 50% of the national wealth, compared to the 30% in the OECD countries. So the GDP is not measuring well the contribution of natural capital, and decision makers are lacking of information. So we need to make visible the benefits that the society is receiving from the natural capital. So if we move to the next slide, this is the way after discussions, we represent the returns from natural capital. So we need to realize that the natural capital is providing returns in terms of environmental issues like providing resilience or intrinsic values. It's also really important for our economies as all the businesses are depending on natural capital, and the societies are also receiving returns. So our society depends for health issues, for maintaining our livelihoods in terms of job creation. So all the role of the policymaking is to manage the trade-offs between all these returns. That's why it's in transversal way. If we move to the next slide, you can see that in the narrative is a very practical narrative. So we show more than 50 examples from different countries. So they are trying to illustrate all these returns. So I'm not going to go in detail through all of them because I found that it's more important for you to explain how the governments are responding to this. So if we move to the next slide and to the following one. So I thought that it was more interesting for you to go deeper in the levers or the ways in which the governments can maximize the returns from the natural capital. So we classify them in 7 categories. This is not one package and can be applied always in the same way because the countries are different. So, but we need to recognize that the change requires a combination of different kind of actions. If we move to the next slide, we can go deeper in these levers. So the first lever is focused on creating information, so creating and supporting insights. The governments are doing this in different ways, organizing information through accounts, like using the system of environmental and economic accounts, explaining the connections between the economy and the nature, or mapping, for example, using the maps of ecosystem services. The second kind of lever is trying to promote the work of front runners, because through sharing their experiences, their knowledge, and the tools that they are using, they can convince others and they can escalate the use of natural capital approaches. The third lever is focused on participation. So governments cannot do everything by themselves. They need the participation of all the society, all the stakeholder groups, and they need to create public-private partnerships. The fourth lever is focused on the resources. We need to invest, and governments can invest in ecosystem or ecosystem services. And you can see in the narrative many examples from different countries that are using these kind of levers. If we move to the next slide, we can see that the other levers are focused on mainstreaming the natural capital into policy. So it's not just a matter of creating the information, that was the first level, but how to integrate this information from the beginning in the design of the policies. We need to create institutional links, because the policies cannot just come from the environmental department. So we need to create multi and institutional links with other departments and use multiple kinds of information from macro indicators. The following lever is focused on standardization, how to promote and support standardization, because we are at the coalition, we really believe that harmonization is helping to have common language and common approaches, and this is helping to escalate the use of natural capital approaches and mainstreaming natural capital into decision making. And governments can really support that. And the final lever is focused on how to change the rules of the game. So you are probably very familiar with that, so I'm not going to insist on it. So as you can see, the governments have different ways of intervening and maximizing the returns that I explained before. So this is all about the narrative, the result of the narrative. You can find it in our webpage. And if we move to the next slide, as I mentioned, I would like also to explore a bit about our initiative of combining forces. So this is more about how to see the synergies between the approaches that are used by the public and the private sector. So we see that both sectors are interested in understanding the connections with the natural capital, and they are organizing the information and using the information in different ways. Some frameworks are focused more on accounting and disclosure, and other frameworks are putting more emphasis on the decision making. If we move to the next slide, we can see, sorry, yeah, thank you. So we can see that the private sector with the natural capital protocol put the emphasis on the decision making, and the public sector with the system of environmental and economic accounts is putting more emphasis on the accounting side. So we think that that's why we put these arrows, because we think that the system of environmental and economic accounts could benefit to what the private sector is doing, because there is not a harmonized accounting framework for the private sector. And we believe that the benefits of the natural capital protocol in trying to inform decisions can also be a framework that could be useful for the public sector to help them in using the information from the accounts to improve their decision-making process. So if we move to the next slide, in the Combining Forces Initiative last year, we conducted several interviews to key stakeholders to try to identify how we can move forward in combining forces. And we identified these 5 key areas of work. We, of course, need to strengthen the links between the community, and we can focus on trying to have a stronger narrative. We can see how the harmonization between what the public sector and private sector is doing could contribute, and also there is a common interest in exchanging data between them. And all these things have to be proven to be practical, so that's why we need case studies. And that's why the Natural Capital Coalition this year is focusing in developing a case study program for the next 3 years to try to explore all these elements. So if we move to the next slide, this is the end from my side. So I wanted to give you an overview of what we have been doing. And now I want to hand over to the 2 practical examples from Costa Rica and from the Netherlands to complement this presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Marta. So Next, I'm going to hand it over to Lucrecia Salazar from Costa Rica, who will discuss water accounts.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you're coming through clear.
Okay. So thank you for having me. My name is Lucrecia Salazar. I work at the Central Bank of Costa Rica and at the Environmental Statistics Division specifically. And the idea today is to tell you briefly about the case study that we made for the public services company of Heredia. This is one of the small water provisioning companies of our country. And the main idea behind the case study was to develop a water account for a small company and show the use of the water account at a smaller scale. So to give a little bit of context, the central bank started developing environmental accounts. We started in 2014 with the support from the WAVES initiative from the central bank and from the World Bank, I'm sorry. And in 2016, the Central Bank of Costa Rica took the responsibility of developing environmental accounts and trying to institutionalize them to make sure they were being constantly updated. So we created a special unit at the Central Bank that works entirely on this subject. So we have developed accounts for water, forest, and energy. They have a national scope, and for the water subject, we started thinking about developing some case studies, and the first of which was the case study for the Public Services Company of Heredia, which we call the ESPH. The idea was to work on an urban case study for water and a rural case study for water for to show the agricultural sector. We still haven't published the agricultural case study. We only have the ESPH. So the idea was to create a tool for the development of a business strategy and show the importance of the water accounts and the small scale indicators and how they can be used in the business strategy. One of the advantages of working on a small scale was that the ESPH has a small coverage from our country, so it was easier. It's easier for them to have better measurements, better statistics, and so we were able to create a more detailed account than our national water account because they have a high level of statistical information. So the company, for those of you who don't know it, of course, was created in 1976, and it provides water and electricity to a small part of the province of Heredia. So to give you an idea, the population that they supplied as of 2016 is 270,000 people from the almost 5 million people that are provided with water at a national scale. So in this map, you can see the geographic scope of the case study. So in the upper right corner of the slide, you can see the map of Costa Rica. So the red spot is the area of influence of the ESPH. This is where they provide their water services. So it's a very small region of the country. So that was part of an advantage for us in making the case study. Some of the main results are shown here. Some of the main indicators that we were able to develop. So we have, for example, the water bill per person in liters per day. So this is water per person per day. So comparing it to the national data, we have that the average was 155 liters per day but the ESPH provided 240 liters per day. That's a lot more. And the interesting part is that this water was provided at a lower price than the national average. National average was 575 colones per cubic meter, while the ESPH charged 474 colones per cubic meter. So they're providing more water at a lower price. And probably this is shown because they are a little bit more efficient than the other companies in our country, because we can see the physical water losses. For example, the ESPH is one of the companies that has the lower physical water loss. The physical water loss is the amount of water that is lost in the whole provisioning service of water. So from the point of abstraction of the water up to the end users of the water, the national average is that more than half of the water is lost, but for the ESPH, it's only 37%. So that shows how they are more efficient than the other companies in our country. Some of the well, in this slide you can see some of the main results. Also, we have in the left side graph showing how the losses have been coming down to lower levels from 2005 to 2013, where they started with percentage of losses that were more than half than 50% of the water, and how with the implementation of different programs and approaches to lower these losses, they were able to come up to the 37 that we showed in the previous slide. And on the right side, what we can see is the water use of their corporate customers by economic activities. So this is one of the best applications that they see, where we were able to assign to their water clients an ISIC code. Because of the small scale of the company, we were able to classify it by economic activity. So we can see in detail which of the activities in the country or the company are the ones that are using the most water, so they can implement better programs or see which of the economic activities are the ones that are using the water. So one of the main results here is that the main users are the manufacturing sector, followed by the real estate activities. So we presented all of these results to the general manager of the company and other high-level officials, and we explained all of these results. And the first level of usefulness that they found in the results that we were showing was the fact that they wanted to see more. So they started implementing they started trying to improve their own statistics. So we were able to develop more and more indicators. So in the first case, seeing their data classified by economic activity, they were interested in implementing the ISIC codes as part of their administrative records. So they made an arrangement with the National Statistical Office, and they are working at the time on trying to assign an ISIC code to each of their clients, and they have some of their first results now. So they see an advantage in knowing specifically who's using the water. And also, we see that one of the main users is the real estate sector. This means that this area of our country is a very commercial area, so there are many buildings that are for renting for commercial uses. So in the records, they show their water bill is recorded with the owner of the building. So this is why we see that the real estate sector is one of the main users, but they want to know not who's the owner of the building, but who is using the water. So what activities are renting these buildings to, and what is the use of the water that they're making. So they're also working on trying to have better records, not only of who's the owner, but who's the person renting the building and what's the economic activity that they are developing. So these are some of the main applications that they see at first. And on the next steps, they are interested in trying to update this case study because we made it only up to 2013, so they have shown interest in updating it and seeing more of the potential uses of the accounts and all the analysis that can be undertaken from it. So this is mostly what I wanted to tell you about our case study, and I leave you here with my contact information and link to the website of the Central Bank where you can find the case study and all the other publications of the environmental accounts.
All right, thank you very much. So now we're going to hear from Sander de Bruyn, who will discuss the development of the Environmental Prices Handbook.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope that everybody can hear me well.
We can.
Okay, great. Okay, my name is Sander de Bruyn. I'm from CE Delft, and next slide, please. We are a small research and consultancy company based in the Netherlands. We are basically a non-profit organization. Originally, we were part of the environmental movement, but that is really a long time ago. And I'm heading the economics department at CE Delft. And basically, already for 20 years, we have been involved in kind of research on valuation of emissions and environmental impacts. Next slide, please. And the reason that I'm here to speak is about the handbooks of environmental prices. Actually, this was a project that started in January 2016, and I think it was finally finalized in October 2018. And we have produced 2 handbooks there in the picture below the text. So we have the Environmental Prices Handbook 2017, which is a Dutch version, and we have the Environmental Prices Handbook EU28, and that's the EU28 version. And they differ not in methodology so much, but they differ rather in scope. So the Environmental Prices Handbook for the Netherlands reflects environmental prices that are relevant for the Netherlands, and the EU28 version reflects the environmental prices as average for the EU28. Next slide, please. So what are these environmental prices? Well, they reflect the loss of welfare that occurs that if one unit of pollutants is released into the environment, or if one type of disturbance is inflicted on the environment. And so environmental prices are, in general, when it relates to emissions, they relate to an average emission in the Netherlands, or EU28, in the year 2015 from an average location using an average emission source. Because, as you can understand, the damages from pollution differ a lot with respect to the place where actually the pollution takes place. And so the translation, from emission into concentration, into impacts, into damage, is often, in some cases, it is very location specific. So these kind of prices that we developed are average prices. Next slide, please. So which damage is included in the environmental prices? I have now this slide in front of me, and you should also have it. So that is slide 35, its number. We basically have been investigating 5 types of damages. So the first is human health, and we look at various impacts on human health, also, for example, IQ impacts, but also illness or preliminary deaths. Then we look at ecosystem services, especially with respect to biodiversity losses, and also with respect to crop losses. Then we look at building and materials that are affected from pollution. We also try to look at resource availability. Although we mention it everywhere, we in the end did not manage to quantify that properly. And in the end, we also looked at other kind of impacts on human well-being, like for example disturbance or noise, or visual impacts also as well. Next slide, please. So, what is this Handbook of Environmental Prices? That is, in essence, that's an effort that was undertaken by the Dutch government, and we had a Dutch steering committee, and the aim was to get a standardization on the way how environmental impacts are included in social cost benefit analysis, or how they are included in other uses, like in the company sphere. And so basically we set up a kind of relationship model where the emissions, they impact on environmental themes, on midpoints, and each of these impact on the endpoints. And from the endpoints we derive at evaluation. So if we, for example, look at sulfur dioxide, well, that matters for a number of midpoints, but most notably acidification and particulate matter formation. And then if we look at particulate matter formation, for example, we see that it impacts on two endpoints. It impacts on human health, and it impacts on buildings and materials. And since we both can evaluate that, we can get a evaluation for sulfur dioxide emissions. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the results? I present you here some figures that we derived for the EU28. And, well, I'm not going to describe them in that much detail, but the importance here is that the carbon dioxide emissions basically are increasing every year. So the central estimate now is 57 euros a ton. That is considered to be, by some it's considered to be fairly low. But you have to keep in mind that these prices will rise every year by 3.5%, while the prices for the other emissions, they remain constant at their 2015 level. Basically, until so far, as I told you before, that we have around 20 years of experience, and every 7-8 years we have come up with an update of these environmental prices. Next slide, please. So what is the results? Is not only evaluation of emission, but it is also an evaluation of midpoints that can be used in life cycle analysis. And so we have here for a couple of midpoints, we have derived the typical cost factors. Basically, there is a slight difference between if you use our methods if you use life cycle analysis in order to obtain a figure for external costs, or if you use life cycle analysis and you want to have a single score. And in a single score, that is the weighting factor that you then can apply. Next slide, please. So the applications of environmental prices I will now discuss. So there are basically three types of applications. The first is in social cost-benefit analysis. So as I told before, the Handbook Environmental Prices was basically established as a way to standardize valuation of environmental impacts on social cost-benefit analysis for governmental projects. So this was also enforced that this is the recommended way how to value the environmental impacts in a social cost-benefit analysis. Well, the second application already outlined is in life cycle analysis. So we see a growing, let's say, wish from the community of life cycle analysis to come up with single score reports, so that all the various impacts are captured in one indicator. And the environmental prices can do this, and it is also often used for this purpose. And the third, I think, is also very relevant in this context, is for the environmental reporting of companies. So our prices have been used in integrated profit and loss accounts, but also in other business applications. And I will, next slide please, show you some of these applications. So the first is a tool which is called for small and medium enterprises in the Netherlands, where they, in a very quick and rather transparent way can decide upon their environmental scores. And here is an example of a company that can score using this tool, and over time you can see that it can lower their emissions. For example, in 2009 by getting specific contracts for green electricity that have then a zero value in this tool. So companies can find with such tools ways how to lower their environmental profile, and it expresses that in a score. Not in a monetary score, it expresses in a score of 100 compared to other people in the business, so it's a relative score. But it is an interesting application where behind all the calculations, in order to get to single scores, we use the environmental prices. So next slide, please. So the other example is a project that we undertook for the European Commission, for the DG Move. So they wanted to have an investigation to what extent do current charges on petrol and on gasoline, but also ticket prices for aviation and ticket prices for trains. To what extent do all these costs that consumers pay cover the external costs of using this particular mode of transport? And here we did an investigation, and we figured out basically that all modes of transport are currently underpriced. So the external costs are way higher than the current prices that consumers pay directly or indirectly for using these transport modes. So the highest internalization is achieved, this is European Union figures, is achieved for passenger car use, where around 38% of the external costs are being internalized. And you can see that for buses and trains, actually very few of the costs are internalized. That's also partly because these modes of transport tend to be subsidized in the European Union. This is to be published in June 29th. Next slide, please. And then the third, Leendert-Jan, after me, will talk about, so that is the use in environmental profit and loss accounts and integrated profit and loss accounts. I have here a figure of last year, integrated or environmental profit and loss account from Philips. I think Leendert-Jan will give an updated figure I already saw in the slide. So, but not only Philips, also companies like Novartis or Vodafone are using our environmental prices for their corporate social reporting. Next slide, please. So another application, for example, is a very practical one, but the government of Flanders, which is a region in Belgium, wanted to investigate if the use of biomass actually was a good idea, and especially in cities, in home heating applications in cities, because there's a lot of pressure now to use biomass in order to lower the CO2 emissions and to achieve the low carbon economy. But actually, in the case of home heating in cities, this very clearly comes at the expense of air quality. And here we monetized this all in external costs of euro per gigajoule heat output. And then we figured out that all the biomass heating appliances actually have way larger external costs than the fossil fuel based heating appliances. So actually it is probably not a good idea to subsidize biomass to use in even modern stoves in cities in Flanders. That is the policy implication of such work. And then the last is also again, so next slide please, is also is for a client, which is a wastewater treatment plant, and they wanted actually to investigate a way to add oxygen to the water, and so they kind of did a financial business case, and then they thought, well, this new technique is not really profitable given our own internal rate of return. But then they asked us also to perform a social business case, so where we monetize actually the environmental impacts, and then it was shown that actually this was a good investment from the societal perspective. that was not yet decisive for this company to undertake this investment, but then they were discussing the cost effectiveness of this new technique compared to a plan that they already had to install solar panels in their territory. And then it turned out that this actually was a cheaper way to internalize external costs than solar panels. And that actually made them triggered to undertake this investment and to postpone the investment in solar panels until the next investment round. So it is kind of a way to prioritize your investments that you are wanting to take as a company. Next slide, please. So basically, this was the end. So I gave you an introduction to the environmental prices. I think they reflect the welfare laws. It's also good to mention that at present, this is quite extensive. We have, for over 2,500 pollutants, we have environmental prices for releases into air, water, and soil. We also have a few other impacts like noise, land occupation, land use changes monetized. It's also important to understand that if you undertake life cycle analysis, and it is a great tool to monetize immediately the impacts from the life cycle analysis. And also, it is basically open source. So we developed this for the Dutch government with the explicit goal of distributing it openly so that everybody can use it. I must say that we also thought about this, and we thought, well, we could try to make a business model in giving advice on the correct application of environmental prices. So that's always possible because it is a complicated system. And so if people want to have advice, they can contact us. So we also see some future developments. So we still hope to expand the number of impacts. Also, I think that in the end, I also think that we hope to contribute to a kind of standardization of such monetization experiences in the global community and in the Natural Capital Protocol as well. So next slide, please. So thank you for your attention. You have here my email address. We also work with a team, so I have my team members included as well. And so you can either phone me or email me if you are interested. And I realized that I didn't send here the link to our report, but they can very simple be Googled. If you type in CE Delft environmental prices, you can find them all easily. Okay, thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Sander. And last, today we're going to hear from Leendert-Jan de Olde, who directs sustainability at Philips, who will tell us about how Philips has applied that handbook among some other of Philips' sustainability work.
You want to bring me up the slides, or do you bring up the slides?
We can do it either way.
It's up to you. If you got them in front of you, please.
Okay, we'll do it from here.
But then you have to push the buttons, correct?
Yep.
Then I'll bring them. Okay. Good. Environmental profit or loss account of Royal Philips. Actually, we are using both the Natural Capital Protocol, and we're also using the CE Delft, the environmental process as just been explained by Sander. So this provides a deeper insights into the environmental impact, and you can see my name, etc. below the screen. Okay, next slide, please. Good, and you can actually push it again. So what is an environmental profit and loss account? Actually a single value to be paid if the environment billed us for providing clean water and air, restoring soils, etc. And then the economic valuation in euros of the benefits and damage, as just explained by Sander. That's also what we have been using. So, and you can push once more. Yeah, there's a second part. So why did we actually create it? We got a strategy called Healthy People, Sustainable Planet. That's the 2020 strategy. And actually, we want to underpin the innovation priorities and awareness also in the business units that we have within Philips. Secondly, we also noticed that investors and are actually asking for this, and also sustainability ratings. We see them moving from effort into impact. Secondly, we also request more and more customers asking for data transparency. So we got eco passports and environmental product declaration, which tells something about the products that we make, but it doesn't tell the overall picture. So we also saw an increase in that one. And last bullet is also that we've always been the front runner in providing transparency. We're number one in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index on the effort, but also all kind of other ratings. We're often number one or close to number one. Next slide, please. So what we decided in 2017, when we looked at all the competition around there, we said, okay, they have, if you look at the scope, and we look at all the other parties that are out there, well, not everyone is covering to the full extent the scope of an environmental profit loss. If you look at a big competitor that we have, they're all the way to the right. They do only LCAs, but then they haven't monetized anything. You can push one more. Yeah, so this is what Philips decided in 2017. We said we're going for the full scope, and we're going to do everything at once. And there was quite an extensive exercise, but thanks to the work of the Natural Capital Protocol and the standardized framework, and that we had a good system in place, we were able to do so with the dedicated effort of a handful of people. Next slide, please. So two big elements in there. First of all, we're using the LCA methodology, recipe methodology, which is internationally recognized and open source. So that was the first part, and push once more. And the second element is what Sander just explained, the CE Delft environmental pricing. So, and for us, it is crucial to have an open source conversion factors to monetize the environmental impacts. And the table below, you can see also what Sander has just been showing on the, how it has been monetized per theme. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the scope and the approach? I think you can see the whole life cycle with resource extraction and manufacturing, etc., and all the way around. Crucial that we use, where possible, we relied on primary data. So we did the cradle to grave, we did the entire portfolio, we used reference products. I'm not sure if everyone knows the filters portfolio, but on one hand, we got coffee machines, espressos, baby bottles, but also we got large medical devices, MR machines. So we got a huge, widespread portfolio. We covered all the business activities and all the environmental impacts. We did it in recipe, and then the approach was LCA based on reference products, and then where possible, primary data or otherwise secondary data come from the EcoInvent database. Next slide, please. Now, we've done it, we built it bottom up, and by doing it, we used actually EcoChain, and EcoChain is a startup company. And it provides a tool where you can really bottom up start to build your whole environmental impact of your company and then add monetization. And you have to push 4 times the button, I think. Because the first thing is Credit 360. Credit 360 is a tool that we have to internally to collect data in line with the Natural Capital Protocol. It's data from the environmental impact that we have in the manufacturing sites. SAP, that's the financial system where we can see on how much do we actually purchase of materials. Then the processes, so actually you can get a nitty-gritty overview of your own manufacturing site and which processes in a manufacturing site are the biggest contributors. Then you got the products, so the BOM, so it's for bill of materials and the sales. So what are the materials and the components in a product? And then product use and recycling. So the use case, we decided actually to use the full life cycle of the device and take an aggregated number. So for example, a vacuum cleaner, let's say 5 or 7 years, that's what we took. So the use case might be a little bit exaggerated in this calculation, but at least we take it into account in the whole calculation. And I think it's also justified because we produce it in a certain year, so you can also take the whole life cycle into account. So this is the tool that we're using, and we can go to the next slide. So Sander just showed you the 2017, which had 7.2 billion. Now we increased a little bit further, and the environmental profit and loss account in 2018 is based on Dutch pricing 7.5. Now I stress the Dutch pricing because in the Dutch pricing we know that the impact from particular matter is a little bit higher compared to, for example, if we would do it at European or global pricing. That is something that we will be focusing on in the next couple of years to not only rely on Dutch pricing, which is a bit exaggeration of the total impact that we have or loss account that we have, but also rely much more on pricing coming from other regions if they are available. And the interesting thing is you can see the custom use phase. So actually at consumer premises, consumer house, you can see 6.5 billion, so representing a bit more than 85% of the total environmental losses coming from use phase. And if you see on the left, you can see the materials and components, so the supply chain, 792 million. So they're also quite significant where electronics and metals play a big part, and then plastics is also still 10% of that part. And actually the own operations, like the business travel, business travel, non-industrial sites, etc. It's a rather limited impact, to be honest. Next slide, please. Now, the great thing by building it bottom up is that here you can see different business units that we have. By doing so, we can actually get the insight on which business units are actually contributing most to the total environmental loss. And by doing so, you make the business leaders a little bit nervous because if, for example, this domestic appliance they notice that they are close to 40% of total environmental loss account of a company, and then they know that the company will stress to them to start doing more stuff and become more environment friendly. So there's a nice thing forward. And to the right, you can see the medical businesses, so the IGT, DI, US stands for ultrasound. It's smaller, but the devices are bigger, but the quantity is then is less. Okay, we can go to the next slide. As said before, we got a big variety of products. So on the left, you can see the environmental price of a baby bottle. It's less than 5 euro cents. And then if you add a little bit of electricity to that with an electric shaver, you get to 1.5. Steam iron, there's a lot of energy, 60 euros. And then you can see two big devices, ICT and Achieva, 150 and 190,000 euros. Those are big medical devices, often in on mode for a huge time of the day. And they consume a lot of energy and also, of course, a lot of materials. So this allows us to do these kind of insights and see where the hotspots are in the company, and also within each product group see where the hotspots are on environmental impact. One more slide. So it also provides us. If we look for example, at the product hotspots, and this is a hairdryer, we know that this is a heating device. So yes, there's quite some impact. We can also look at the component hotspots, and then we can also have a look at the supply hotspots. So it also provides us the insight in with whom suppliers we shall cooperate and try to see if we can further improve their way of working and making it more environmental friendly. Okay, next slide. So, what is unique about the environmental profit or loss account of Philips? It's a bottom-up approach. We really started nitty-gritty at all the details and simply started building it. It's an open source methodology and standards, and that is absolutely crucial for us. If you want to have a reliable methodology that is future-proof, that is also accepted by the shareholders, stakeholders, and anyone else out there, it has to be an open source methodology and standard. Reasonable assurance, that's what we got from the accountants. So, and I think we're unique in that sense. So reasonable assurance is the highest level of accountants assurance that you can get. Software enabled, it's owned in-house, allowing us to scaling up at a low cost, also crucial for us. One more push on the button. By the way, on the right side, you can see our CEO, Frans van Houten, at a shareholder meeting. And the funny thing is, when the 2017 annual report was published, we actually had to limit the amount of questions about the EP&L. There were so many shareholders and stakeholders going to ask questions about that. They were so interested in what we have been doing there. So we're going to refine the EP&L account. There's also a way to refine things. So we're going to do that. Also the underlying data, we're going to fine tune everything. We want to move to EU or global environmental pricing. So for example, if we do that EU prices, it would be 5.7 billion euro. So it's lower, and that's mainly to do with the impact on a particular matter. We want to add the societal benefits, so the profit in the EP&L. So what is actually the societal profit if you, for example, go into an MR machine and you're going to have a treatment that fits with you, you're going to live a healthy life for another couple of years. So that's the profit part. You're also going to cooperate with stakeholders to move to standardize one single standard for EP&L. There are simply too many standards out there on monetization as well. We relied on open source, and that was crucial for us. It has to be scientifically robust, of course, to withstand any criticism from anyone out there. It has to be transparent and based on open source information and as recognized as the standard by our stakeholders. Good. Next slide. Last slide. If you want more information, if you want to have more information, you can. The top one is a link. So if you push the link, and I assume you will get the slides afterwards, you can find more information at the Philips website, where the whole methodology is explained in detail. Good. And that was it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. So we don't have much time for questions, but if anyone wants to type in an essential question, they're welcome to type that into the chat box, or you can send it via email to NESP, and we're happy to pass it on to the presenters. So with only 3 minutes left, I will start off with a question from our end, and I'll read any that come into the chat. So this one goes back to Marta. Have you found that some of the levers that you described that kind of came out of the government dialogue are particularly essential, that sort of make natural capital integration more successful?
So for the government, I don't know if it's more successful, but probably the one that it was more extended was the use of the system of environmental economic accounts. But we insisted that it's important to mainstream that, because some governments are building the accounts but are not using them to then take decisions. So I think that, yeah, they're particular. So we put a bit of focus on highlighting those that are using information, and also the ones that are supporting the first movers are relatively successful. So this is the example of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is doing quite well in promoting the work of first movers, like we have seen with this example. So how helping them with some standardized information, like the environmental handbook prices, can help Philips to build this kind of information, and this is helping other companies in the Netherlands and in other places to feel that there is a reference and they have to move towards that, because the financial world is asking for this kind of information, and it's doable. So I would say that these two are the most important.
Thank you. And we have one question that came in from the audience, and sounds like it's for everyone, but can someone talk a bit about the differences between EU and US policy in regards to the implementation of natural capital thinking? Who's doing better, and how can it be improved? So maybe Marta. Yeah.
Yes. It could be great to hear from you, and I think that it's great that we have this regional platform to learn more from how the US is doing in terms of their natural capital policy, and it's great that we have now the Duke University as a member of the coalition to discuss about these things. So we have the feeling that the private sector was really interested in natural capital issues some time ago, and now probably maybe I'm biased because I'm in Europe, so I see many examples from European companies, and I think that in the United States now there is a feeling to have more interest about these things. And I don't know if it's a response to some policies or not. So it would be great to explore it, and with our conversations, it would be great to hear from you. So from my view, in the European Union, there is a lot of interest, for example, in sustainable finance, and this is a key driver to make the change in the European Union. So I would be very happy to hear from the audience if there is also this focused on the US side.